We often talk about depression as chaos, as the deafening noise of sorrow or anxiety. But sometimes the deepest pain is the absolute silence. It is the uncanny realization that you are standing in a place of profound beauty or success, a place that is supposed to be yours, and yet the emotional audio track has been muted. The fear is not sadness itself, but the chilling absence of feeling anything at all. This is the core pain we need to name anhedonia. If you've spent any time here, you know we return to this subject because anhedonia is not just a symptom, it's the quiet thread woven through the fabric of modern psychological distress. It is the medical term for the inability to experience pleasure, joy, or anticipation. When we feel joy, a sophisticated network in our brain, often called the reward pathway, lights up. Neuronal transmissions, chemical signals pass through our cells, confirming that what we did was worthwhile. We feel the rush of excitement before a trip, the warmth of satisfaction after finishing a difficult project, or the simple contentment of a moment with friends. But anhedonia occurs when this entire pathway gets disrupted, short-circuited. The signals stop arriving. You do the thing, you achieve the goal, you stand on the summit, but the feeling, the crucial feedback is gone. It's like working tirelessly for a paycheck that never arrives. And this is where the cycle begins. When things stop feeling good, the most natural consequence is that you stop doing those things. Why expend energy? Why invest your limited time? At that point, your logic center rightly concludes, I am working for free. I am getting no emotional reward from this, therefore I do not wish to continue. This is how anhedonia, if left unchecked, can quietly steal your entire life. It doesn't rip it away in a moment of dramatic trauma. It erodes it slowly, one decision at a time. You start saying no to the difficult project because the accomplishment won't land. You start canceling plans with friends because the effort of getting dressed and making the commute outweighs the non-existent emotional payoff. You are left with a constant state of internal stasis, a blankness that is far more uncomfortable than active sorrow. I once saw a video about a highly engineered space, an anechoic chamber. You may have heard of it. It's essentially a giant underground studio meticulously treated to be the quietest place on Earth. It absorbs 99.9% of sound energy. It is so utterly silent that visitors cannot stay inside for more than a few minutes. Because when the world's noise is canceled, all that remains is the sound of your own body, your heartbeat, the whir of your joints, the rush of blood, the very sound of your food digesting. That physical discomfort, the inability to escape the sound of your own biological existence, is the closest physiological metaphor for severe anhedonia. It is when the world's output, the external stimulus, is completely muted, and all you are left with is the eerie, unpleasant echo of the self. It is uncomfortable, it is unsustainable, and it creates a downward spiral where your life begins to hollow out. The natural consequence is not just a low mood, but a slow, quiet collapse of your world into nothingness. We need to find a way to navigate that void. The mistake we make is evaluating the worth of an experience solely based on the emotional reward it offers in the present moment. That single evaluation point is the main weakness in our defense against the anhedonia cycle. It forces us to believe that if something doesn't feel good right now, it is not worth doing. But according to psychological principles and the way human memory functions, an experience can bring you emotional dividends in 3 entirely different time frames. And understanding this allows us to find the only genuine loophole in anhedonia's silent grip. That loophole is retrospection. Let me illustrate this paradox of disconnected emotion with a memory from my own life, a time when I stood at the very peak of a dream and realized I was utterly hollow. When I was 17, my father and I spent nearly a year planning a scuba diving trip to the Florida Keys. For me, someone who deeply loved the ocean fish and the sheer complexity of the natural world, this was a monumental event. This trip was scheduled during one of the darkest, most stagnant periods of my late adolescence. I was dealing with a profound depressive episode coupled with a pervasive anxiety that made any large change in routine feel like a logistical nightmare. The anticipation phase was a psychological battlefield. Even though I knew logically this was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, the period leading up to it was defined not by excitement, but by stress. I worried about the plane flight, the unfamiliar hotel, the rigid schedule, and how my nocturnal sleep patterns would clash with daytime activities. Anxiety robbed me of the joy of anticipation. Yet we went. We flew down, navigated the logistics, and finally, on the first morning, we boarded the charter boat and motored out to a coral reef miles offshore. I remember the moment vividly. We were floating on the surface, adjusting our gear, preparing to descend. I dipped my mask into the water, and what I saw was not just beautiful. It was sublime. Hundreds of fish, a living kaleidoscope of colors swimming just beneath the surface, navigating the strange, silent architecture of the reef. It was everything I had ever dreamed of seeing. My logical, cognitive brain was overwhelmed with awe. It sent a clear, powerful signal. This is an incredible sight. This is joy. Feel this. And I felt that thought, that signal traveling through my mind, heading toward the emotional processing centers of my brain. I literally anticipated the wave of visceral pleasure, the overwhelming rush of wow that should accompany such an image. But it just stopped. It hit a wall. It was as if I was watching the whole spectacular scene through a thick, soundproof window. I could see the colors, the movement, the sunlight filtering through the water. I could intellectually appreciate the enormous effort and expense my father had invested. But the experience itself was blocked. I remember thinking with a terrifying clarity, even this can't get through to me right now. This is a dream realized, and I am aware of it, yet the connection is severed. We continued the trip. We saw moray eels caught grouper had unique adventures. But at no point did that rush of emotion, that explosion of joy ever arrive. I was present physically, but emotionally I was standing in an anechoic chamber, only hearing the internal discomfort of my own disconnection. It is crucial to understand that this was not a matter of ungratefulness. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate the trip. I appreciated it consciously, logically the whole time. But my emotional world simply did not recognize the signal. The experience in the moment felt flat, strained, and ultimately unsuccessful. So if we only look at the first two time frames, anticipation stressful and present moment numb, the trip was a clear failure. A waste of time and money, a confirmation that nothing mattered. This is precisely the conclusion Anhedonia wants you to draw. But the story doesn't end there, because that is where the third time frame retrospection begins its quiet work. To truly bypass Anhedonia's grip, we have to look closely at the underlying mechanisms, not just the symptoms. Many works in neuroscience define the reward pathway as being heavily reliant on the neurotransmitter dopamine. Dopamine is not the pleasure chemical itself, as is often simplified. Instead, dopamine is the motivational signal. It is the chemical that says, pay attention to this. This is salient. Do this again. When we engage in a potentially rewarding activity, going out with friends, finishing a task, or simply seeing a beautiful sunset, dopamine is released. This release acts as a predictive mechanism, reinforcing the behavior. When this pathway is working, we anticipate the reward anticipation phase and register the feedback present phase. However, in states of chronic depression, prolonged stress, or subtle trauma, the brain makes a dangerous calculation. The problem isn't necessarily a simple lack of dopamine. Often it is a downregulation of the receptors for dopamine, or a fatigue in the entire reward system circuitry. But for many who deal with persistent numbness, it is the result of a deeper survival mechanism. Think of Anhedonia as an emotional shutdown protocol. Our limbic system, particularly the amygdala, is constantly scanning the environment for threats. When stress becomes chronic, or when a traumatic event, large or small, overloads the system, the body initiates a defense strategy. According to polyvagal theory and related models, one of the deepest forms of defense is the dorsal vagal shutdown. This is a freeze response designed for survival, not thriving. In this shutdown state, the nervous system prioritizes safety over stimulation. Joy, excitement, and deep pleasure are, biologically speaking, complex and high-energy processes. They require the system to be open and vulnerable. If the brain perceives the environment or even the internal landscape as unsafe or overwhelming, it decides, we must conserve energy. We must minimize potential emotional damage. And so the brain essentially turns the volume down on all high-stimulus input. This is why when I saw the glorious coral reef, my cognitive brain sent the awe signal, but the emotional reward center refused to process it. The amygdala, operating under a persistent high alert mode, essentially intercepted the emotional signal and classified it as low priority, or even a potential risk for a system already running on fumes. If you don't feel anything, you can't be hurt by it. Therefore, anhedonia is often not a flaw of character or a failure of will. It is a biological signature, a ghost signal from a nervous system that is exhausted and believes it is still fighting for survival. This is why the instruction to just cheer up or try harder is not only useless but actively cruel. It ignores the genuine physical shutdown of a system trying to protect itself. Understanding anhedonia as this complex shutdown protocol is the first step toward finding the workaround. Because while the brain can gatekeep present moment pleasure, it cannot fully control how it processes information that is already archived. This brings us back to the time frames. The core mistake we make when dealing with anhedonia stems from a fundamental error in how we conceptualize the value of our time and energy. This is what I call the present moment trap. In cognitive psychology, we understand that humans are constantly engaging in cost-benefit analysis. When we consider an activity, a workout, a social event, a vacation, we ask consciously or unconsciously, will the expected return in pleasure outweigh the investment in time, energy, and attention? For a neurotypical brain, the expected return is high, driven by a functional dopamine system that signals the imminent reward. But when anhedonia strikes, the projected return is a flat zero. The internal calculation becomes, from effort high to emotional reward, zero. The rational, exhausted mind concludes, discontinue this behavior. This is a logical process, but it is fundamentally flawed because it ignores the nonlinear nature of human emotional processing. The third time frame retrospection is not just about remembering an event. It's about re-encoding the event when your emotional capacity has changed. Consider the anxiety loop. Anxiety is what often sabotages the anticipation phase. I experienced this heavily with the trip to Chicago for my daughter's birthday. The trip itself was inherently good. The Shed Aquarium is a world-class experience and my daughter loves marine life. But the weeks leading up to it were consumed by logistical stress dealing with Chicago traffic, managing parking, navigating toll roads, and ensuring the kids were comfortable. This kind of anxiety, common in chronic stress or generalized anxiety disorder, steals the joy of looking forward to the event. The anticipated emotional return is neutralized by the anticipated stress load. Then there is the anhedonia loop, which sabotages the present moment. When the event finally arrives, you have already pushed through the mountain of anxiety, only to find a void on the other side. You are there physically present watching the incredible spectacle, and yet the emotional receptors remain closed. If you happen to experience both chronic anxiety and anhedonia, you face a double trap. I won't enjoy the buildup because of the stress, and even if I push through the stress, I won't enjoy the event itself because of the numbness. It's a psychological catch-22 that leads directly to the paralysis of inaction. This is where the psychological understanding of memory formation becomes our tool. Research shows that memory is not a fixed, stable recording. Every time we retrieve a memory, we are subtly reconsolidating it. We don't just remember the scuba trip, we remember the last time we remembered the scuba trip. When you are in a deep shutdown, your brain is filling the experience with a low emotional marker, neutral, stressed. But it is still filling the factual content. The fish were colorful, the water was clear, I was with my father. The genius of retrospection is that when you retrieve that memory years later, after the shutdown protocol has been deactivated, when your brain is finally in a state of safety and emotional processing, the memory is re-encoded, but this time it is processed through your current, healthier emotional lens. You are effectively tricking the system by separating the filing which happens in the numb state from the processing which happens later. You ensure that the factual content exists so that your future self has something real to work with. The essential insight here, the quiet realization that gives us agency, is this. Anhedonia is not a total thief. It is only a temporary gatekeeper. When we are in the depths of emotional numbness, the feeling is one of passive enduring. We feel like we are simply waiting for the feeling to return. But the truth is, the most powerful thing you can do during this shutdown is to understand that you are not passively waiting. You are actively investing in the future emotional capacity of your mind. This brings us to the core MindRabbit concept, the shadow bank account of memories. Think of your life experiences during the depressive or anhedonic period as deposits into this shadow bank account. When you go for that walk, when you take that painful phone call, or when you push yourself to attend that friend's wedding, you are making a deposit. The currency you are dealing with is fact-based data. The value of that deposit in the present is zero. It offers no immediate emotional yield. You are quite literally working for free. But the shadow bank account is protected by a crucial principle of neuroscience, the temporal gap of emotional processing. The temporal gap is the period between the initial factual filing of a memory and the later retrieval and re-encoding of that memory. The anhedonic brain is extremely effective at closing off the present moment, but it is deeply vulnerable to the future self. Why is this so powerful? because the emotions you experience in the future when you look back on things you did in the past are fundamentally different than the emotions you experienced when that thing was happening. Consider simple examples. The sheer stress of moving across the country in 3 days, a period of chaos and frustration, becomes years later a memory of accomplishment and resilience. The brutal intensity of an early morning workout in the cold is filed as pain, but accessed later as pride and discipline. The scuba trip felt like a hollow failure in the moment. The factual memories were coded, cold, awkward, stressful logistics. But when I access that memory today as a 40-year-old in a regulated, healthier state, the factual data is rerun through a functional reward pathway. My brain can now process the implication of those facts. I saw the coral reef. I pushed past the anxiety. I shared this with my father. These facts suddenly generate feelings of nostalgia, achievement, and profound connection emotions that were physically inaccessible to the 17-year-old self. This is the power of the shadow bank account. The value of the deposit is not determined by the market rate when you make it. It is determined by the emotional solvency of the person who makes the withdrawal years later. Your task during Anhedonia is not to feel better now. Your task is to act as an archivist of experience, ensuring that when the chemical gates finally reopen, the room is not empty. This concept compels us to reframe the struggle of Anhedonia. It is not a failure of living. It is a profound, albeit painful, act of anticipatory self-compassion. You are not living this moment for your present numb self. You are enduring it as a quiet, necessary service for the self you hope to become. The alternative to this quiet investment is devastating, and it's a tragedy I recognize deeply in my own life. If you submit to the cost-benefit analysis of the present moment trap, you cease doing the things with high potential for reward. You enter a phase of profound withdrawal, inactivity, and isolation. And the consequence of that many years later is not just regret, but the trauma of the black hole life. I lived there from ages 14 to 18. That 4-year stretch in my life is a vast blank space in my memory. When I look back, I recall almost nothing of consequence. I didn't engage with activities, I didn't cultivate meaningful relationships, and I certainly didn't feel anything positive. There are physiological reasons for this. Chronic stress and poor self-care, lack of sleep, poor nutrition, sedentary behavior can impair the hippocampus, the brain region crucial for encoding long-term vivid memories. When your brain is constantly diverting energy to the survival-oriented amygdala, the archiving function of the hippocampus suffers. But beyond the biological impairment, the primary reason for the black hole is simply a lack of content. I had very few experiences worth remembering. Now, as an adult who is regulated and healthier, I possess a functioning emotional capacity. I have the ability to retrieve and feel the warmth of old memories. But when I reach back to those years, I find only static. I have nothing to process. I have nothing to re-encode. The absence of memories from those years is itself a source of sorrow today. This is the great danger we are trying to mitigate with the shadow bank account. The fear of looking back on a life or a period of life that was simply not lived. When you are fighting Anhedonia, you are fighting for the density of your past. You are fighting to ensure that your future self does not suffer from a profound emotional poverty. This realization shifts the entire motivation. You are not pushing yourself to go out tonight because you believe you will suddenly feel joy. You are pushing yourself because you are fulfilling a commitment to a better version of yourself, a version who will one day look back and ask, "Did I try to live even when I couldn't feel it?" The answer you provide to that future self must be yes. This is the silent contract you sign with your own resilience. If we accept this framework that Anhedonia is a temporary gatekeeper and that we must invest in the future self, our approach shifts entirely. This is not about motivating yourself. Motivation being dependent on dopamine signaling is exactly what is broken. This is about disciplined commitment to behavioral consistency, even in the absence of feeling. The work here is not about cheering up, it is about quiet persistence. The core instruction is this: commit to the activity, knowing you will feel nothing but trusting in the biological resilience of your system. This principle finds strong backing in the behavioral models used in clinical practice, such as behavioral activation (BA). BA essentially instructs patients to schedule and engage in activities regardless of their current mood. The goal is not immediate pleasure. The goal is to break the cycle of withdrawal and reintroduce the system to potential rewards. For the individual experiencing Anhedonia, BA takes on an added layer of meaning. You are not just breaking the cycle, you are making those vital deposits into the shadow bank account. Practical commitments for the archiving self. 1. Lower the bar for emotional return. Stop expecting a big emotional payoff. When you push yourself to attend a social event, tell yourself, my goal is not to feel joy. My goal is to remain physically present and gather factual data. If you can manage a neutral feeling, you have succeeded. If you manage to laugh once, that is a bonus. 2. Define the memory, archivable event. Choose activities that are inherently rich in objective factual detail, even if they are emotionally flat. A hike, a museum visit, watching a film, or learning a complex new skill. These events create strong, detailed file sizes for your memory archive, giving your future healthier self more content to process. Conversely, lying in bed watching a screen for 8 hours creates a poor archive file, a blurry, indistinct memory. 3. The 2-minute rule of the body. Chronic anhedonia is often associated with a sedentary lifestyle which compounds the neurochemical shutdown. Research on the connection between exercise and mood regulation consistently shows that even minimal activity helps regulate stress hormones and increases hippocampal neurogenesis, the growth of new neurons. Commit to a 2-minute burst of movement, not as an exercise regime, but as a commitment to your biological system. This signals to your nervous system, I am safe enough to move. Remember, this is not toxic positivity. We are not denying the depth of the pain. We are simply employing a sophisticated psychological strategy to bypass a temporary neurochemical fault line. We are employing strategic patience, trusting that the system that shut itself down for protection will, given time and stability, reactivate its own channels. This journey requires profound patience because the emotional rewards may not arrive for months or even years. But the ultimate reward is profound. You are fighting to ensure that your adolescence, your 20s, or any dark period of your life is not viewed later as a black hole, but as a time of courageous, silent endurance. You are ensuring that you have a past worth recalling. The true victory over anhedonia is not a sudden dramatic return of joy. It is the realization years later that you survived the silence without letting it define the totality of your past. In my own narrative, the scuba trip remained a factual record for decades. It was a file marked stressed neutral. But as my life stabilized and as I learned to manage the systemic exhaustion that fueled my shutdown, I found that the emotional gates began to creak open. Today, when I recall the sight of the hundreds of fish, the clarity of the water, and the quiet presence of my father, I can finally access the emotion that was due. It is an overwhelming sensation of achieved nostalgia. I am not feeling the joy of the 17-year-old moment. I am feeling the immense gratitude of the 40-year-old man who recognizes the quiet persistence of his younger self. This is the temporal gap closing. The shadow bank account is finally paying out its dividends. If you are standing in a place of emotional numbness right now, believing that your efforts are pointless, remember this. You are fighting for your future self's narrative. You are ensuring that when the chemical conditions of your brain shift back toward regulation, there will be something meaningful for that future self to look back on. The deepest tragedy is not the pain we feel, but the emptiness we leave behind. The black hole life is preventable not through sudden leaps of motivation, but through the disciplined maintenance of your physical presence in the world. So when the decision comes, when the anhedonia whispers that it's easier to stay home, that it's not worth the effort, that you will feel nothing anyway, acknowledge that voice. Do not fight it. Simply answer it with the truth. I know I won't feel it now. I am not doing this for my present self. I am making a necessary deposit for the self who will need this memory to heal. The value of your action is not determined by the shallow currency of immediate feeling. It is determined by the profound long-term wealth of your life's archived experience. You are being asked to endure a time of silence. You are being asked to trust a biological mechanism of recovery you cannot see. It is perhaps the quietest act of courage a human can perform. The goal is not to fill the silence with noise, but to ensure that when you finally look back, the silence is not all that remains.